Hello, this is Bill Webb, aka Billy Indiana. Today I'm going to take a look at The Lord of the Rings, the Living Card Game by Fantasy Flight. I'm going to give you a basic overview, show you the components, do a very abbreviated partial playthrough, and then close with some review thoughts and some final reflections. Let's get to the table. All right, before I explain the overall gameplay and kind of start a little bit of a walkthrough to help you see how the game works, just a couple clarifications on the components here. The box that I showed you in the intro is actually a larger box that this one came in along with a couple of other features or a couple other components that I'm going to show you as a collector's edition. This one on the left here is the actual base box, the actual base card game box that you would normally find. The other one is a limited edition, collector's edition. I'll tell you just briefly the differences between them. So the base game here has 3 different quests, and then it has 4 different factions fully set up with 3 heroes apiece, and then all the attachments and events and allies that you would need in each of those factions: the tactics faction, the leadership faction, the spirit faction, and the lore faction. And so you can play any of those 3 adventures straight out of this box with any of those 4 spheres of influence or combinations if you want to set up your own deck. In this limited edition box, it comes with this game pad here, this game mat, and then it also comes with this nice single card player aid that helps you kind of go through the steps of playing this game, which I found very helpful. There's also a gold ring, which I don't have out right now, and then it has different heroes with different tactics, leadership, and spirit and lore cards to combine with those heroes, and actually 2 combined sets. So in the base game it comes with just the 4 individual spheres, their heroes and attached cards already kind of separated, and you can combine them yourself. This has 2 sort of combined groups or combined card sets already set up for you and 2 new quests to pursue. So what I'm going to show you today is straight out of the core box. The only reason I'm showing this is so that if you see this online, you'll know it's different. And then also you won't expect this mat or this player aid card if you buy the base traditional game. So it's just a little bit of a clarification. All right, so what you can see out here on the table now are all the components. So let me give you an overview of what the game's about, what these components are, and then the gist of how you play it. I'm definitely not going to do a full playthrough. There's lots of people online who have done that. But I'll just give you an overview quickly of it. So first off, the goal of the game is you are going to play as an individual player up to 4. If you have 2 core sets, you can play with 3 or 4 players. If you just have 1 core set or that limited edition 2-player edition, you can play with 1 or 2 players. So I'm going to show you a 2-player setup, which I think is pretty traditional. And your goal is you're going to use the heroes and all their associated attachments, allies, and events to accomplish and complete a quest and survive that quest. You don't survive if either your threat meter reaches 50, and these are the threat meters here, which we'll talk about in a couple minutes, or if your heroes die off in the quest. And heroes would take on wounds during the quest potentially, and these are the wound tokens that you place on them when that happens. And if their wounds supersede their hit points or their strength allowance, then they would die. And if your heroes die, then you would also not survive the quest and lose the game. So that's just kind of a big picture. Throughout the game, you're going to face different encounters from the AI opponent that would include different enemies, different locations that you have to survive and encounter and explore, and then also just different treacherous events that could happen. So here's the components. So I have this extra one over here since I have the secondary set. I have a 3rd counter. Normally the base game just comes with 2, and I just use this to count the rounds, because if you want to keep the score of how many points you would score in a win, you need to know how many rounds you played. So we keep that one there as a round counter. For this hero, I've got this hero's deck of cards that have the different events and attachments and allies that would help these 3 heroes. And this player, I'm using the lore collection. So I've got 3 lore heroes and the lore cards. And then I've got that player's threat meter. And the way you know what threat level to start at is you look at the numbers in the corner. So Barivor here has a threat of 10, Glorfindel has a threat of 12, and Denethor has a threat of 8. So you add those together and this player would start with 30 threat points. And if you get to 50, like I said before, you'll die. This is just a first player token, and so I'm just saying that this lore character, this player that's using the lore deck, is the first player in our 2-player game. The second player is going to be using the tactics deck, and so I've got 3 tactics heroes, Thalen, Gimli, and Legolas, and they are threat of 9, 11, and 9 respectively, so they start with an overall team threat of 29. And then these are the tactics attachments, events, and allies that they will use throughout the game. Up here I have the encounter deck, and so this is where the AI is going to act to try to defeat us as we go through various locations, face various enemies, and also potentially some different treacherous events. And then this is the actual quest we are trying to accomplish. Now the quest is explained on cards, and I'll talk to you about that just a little bit more in a few seconds. Then the last bit, I've shown you the wound tokens, and I just have them in a couple little Tupperware containers here. There's wound tokens so that you can track how many wounds both the enemies and your heroes and their allies have. I'll just set them off to the side here. And then there are the resources that the allies and, not the allies, but the heroes can gather throughout the game. And so I'll just, again, set these over here to the side for a second. And then these are the progress tokens, and these progress tokens are what you'll be putting on the quest steps as you're trying to accomplish the quest, and then also on the various locations. The locations typically have to have a certain number of progress points achieved before you fully investigated and survived that location, so use these for that as well. All right, so those are the different components, and that's an overview of what the game is about and the pieces that you'll need. Now to set it up, you have the option of just using a straight up lore deck or tactics deck, or like I said, the other leadership and spirit decks that come in the base game, the core set. Or you can mix and match them like that limited edition 2-player set has done for you. If you mix and match them, there's a couple different approaches, and you can read a lot of blogs online about this, but typically speaking, if you're going to use a tournament style approach, you would have your 3 heroes and then a deck of 50 cards, and you can not have any more than 3 of any one type of card. So for instance, one of the allies is Gandalf. You can't have more than 3 Gandalfs in your deck. But you would want to be careful about constructing those decks, because in that collection of attachments and allies and events, your heroes, based on their sphere of influence, can only partner up with certain allies. So a tactics hero can only partner up with a tactics ally, and a tactics attachment can only be used by a tactics hero. A spirit event can only be conjured by a spirit sphere hero. And so you have to make sure that you don't just pick 3 different heroes from 3 different spheres and then all your cards from one different deck. You need to have a pretty balanced deck. So generally speaking, you'll use either all heroes from one sphere, or often maybe 2 heroes from one sphere, and then what some people call a splash hero from that other sphere. And then your deck of events and attachments and allies would be mostly from the deck that matches your heroes, the 2 heroes spheres, the sphere that you have 2 heroes from. And then you'd have a smaller number of cards from the deck that matches that splash hero, that 3rd hero. That's the only one you have in that sphere. Now you can also make a deck of 30, which is how the base game teaches you to start, and it actually gives you some recommended decks to set up in both versions of these startup games. And so typically when my wife and I play, we just set up decks of 30 cards plus the 3 heroes. So hopefully that makes sense in terms of the setup and the different styles of play. So the quest that you're trying to accomplish is driven by these 3 cards. And there's typically 3 cards that guide you through. They typically have a 1 and a 2 and a 3, and there's an A side and a B side. So let me get to the close-up camera and show you what these look like. And let's move these out of the way here. So in this deck, we're looking at the Journey Along the Anduin quest. And the A side typically has a storyline and then sometimes a few bits of information on setup. So there's a storyline here: emerging from Mirkwood Forest with an urgent message and blah, blah, blah. I won't read the rest of it. And then it says setup. Each player reveals 1 card from the top of the encounter deck and adds it to the staging area. And then once you've done that, you flip it over and you look at the part B side, and it often will have some flavor text or storyline, and then it gives you some more directions. Once you've completed this card, and this quest is completed when you've got 8 progress tokens on this quest, then you'll move on to card 2, and you'll read the A side first, and then complete those instructions, or read that storyline, flip it over to the B side, and then it will also generally have progress points that you have to achieve, or some other strategy or goal that you have to achieve. And once you've completed the second card, you move on to the third card. And there are some quests that have multiple level 2 cards or multiple level 3 cards, and depending on which quest you're trying to work through, there are directions within the cards or within the manual that teach you how to manage those quest cards. So let's go back to the main game area and talk to you about that setup that we just mentioned. So back to the A side of card number 1, it says each player reveals 1 card from the top of the encounter deck and adds it to the staging area. So since we're doing a 2-player game, we would pull over 1, and it says this is the Misty Mountain Goblins. And on every card, like the Heroes card, you're going to have a threat level, or sorry, an overall threat strength of the character, and then a threat level within the attacking combat phase and questing phase, and then an attack level and a defense level, and then hit points. There's also these little emblems over here which tell you which card set it comes from. And so when you're doing these quests, you may have noticed the little icons on the side. It tells you within this quest you need the encounter cards that have these emblems. So it's all very well organized with icons. So this first one is a goblin we would have to face. And then the second one is a wolf rider. And so we've got its individual threat as 1, attack of 2, no defense, and 2 hit points. And then it is 10 in terms of its overall threat. So we've followed the instructions on 1A. We flip this over, and on the other side it says, when revealed, search the encounter deck for 1 hill troll if 1 is not already in play. And we didn't draw a hill troll, so we're going to have to do that. Place it in the staging area, and then shuffle the encounter deck. So we're going to take that encounter deck, and we're going to look for a hill troll. There's 1. And we're going to put the hill troll in this staging area. And anytime the game refers to a staging area, they're talking about this little location right here beside the encounter deck. So that's the staging area. All right. And so now we've got 1B done in terms of the when revealed. And then down below it says players cannot defeat this stage while any hill troll cards are in play. So as we saw, we need to get these 8 progress points, which are these footprints tokens. And then we also need to make sure that this hill troll is no longer in play. All right, so that gives us our overarching goal. We know now what our first goal is to achieve. We got to get 8 progress points and kill that hill troll. And we've got our cards set up with 3 heroes apiece and our shuffled quest decks with their allies and attachments and events. All right, so then the basic flow of the game follows a sequence of steps. The first step is called the resource phase, and in the resource phase, you're going to have your set of playing cards for your character. So I'm going to put these threat counters off to the side, and also this first player token off to the side. And at the beginning of the game, you start with six cards, and so I'm just going to put these here. Hopefully I can get them all on. I'm probably going to have to do some overlapping and go off the edge, but those are the 6 cards for this hero deck. And then for player number 1, they need their 6 cards as well. It's going to go off the screen here a little bit, but you get the idea in terms of what we're doing here. So let's move these even further off. So we have our cards. The first step of this resource phase is that we each draw 1 card. So every time we get to the resource phase, you're going to draw 1 more. So now we would each have 7 cards. All right, then we get 1 resource token for each of our heroes. And so we just typically put them right on to the hero card. All right, and this is all laid out on this player aid card. And that is our resource phase. We've got our extra card for this phase, for this round, round 1. We have the resources for our heroes. Then we move on to the planning phase. Now in the planning phase, we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to decide if we want to spend any of these resources to hire an ally, to purchase an attachment for one of our heroes, or to cause one event to take place. And we know how many resources that we need to spend based on the number that's in the top corner of each of these cards. So as I look over these cards, I'm not really going to take much time to strategize, but I see this Gondorian Spearman. I know if we have to have a battle here, he's a pretty good one in battle because he causes an injury even when he dies, and he often dies in battle, just so you know. So I'm going to pay 2 resources, and I actually should be doing this in the other order because this is player number 2, but pay 2 of these resources and put them back in, and now the Gondorian Spearman is an ally I've hired in my planning phase of this. And then if I look at the player number 1, who really probably should have been doing this first, but we just generally do it simultaneously, I may look and see there's a few different people, that different allies that they could choose. I'm going to do an attachment. It says Protector of Lorien. And it says attached to a hero action, discard a card from your hand to give the attached hero +1 willpower or +1 defense until the end of the phase. Limit 3 times per phase. So I'm going to put this attachment on Glorfindel, and that costs 1. And if you have a mixed deck, one other thing you have to keep in mind, and you don't have to when you play with pure decks like just my tactics deck on this player and just lore, but if you have a mixed deck, you can only purchase, like I said before, the Glorfindel is from lore. Glorfindel could only purchase cards from the lore deck, and so only Glorfindel's resources, or you could combine the resources from Glorfindel and another character that also was from the same deck. So 2 different lore heroes could combine their resources to purchase a lore card. So that's one of the downsides of having a combined deck as opposed to a pure deck, but there are a lot of upsides too. This just simplifies the game. So, all right, so we'll just do that one purchase. So we've got an ally purchased over here by the tactics crew. We've got an attachment purchased over here by the lore crew. And so we've purchased what we're going to purchase in the planning phase. And now we have to decide, okay, we are going to face a quest. And to face this quest, we can look up here and see the threat of what's in our staging area. And so this has a quest, or sorry, a threat of 2, a threat of 1, and a threat of 1. And so we've got a total of 4 threat by these 3 creatures that are in the questing area, or in the staging area. So now we need to decide how many of our characters are we going to commit to this quest, and we will compare their willpower to the threat. Now we're going to, before we finalize that quest, which is the next phase coming up, we're going to turn over some more cards. And so we know we have 4 here, but we're going to flip over 2 cards that could potentially add more to that number of 4. So as we're determining who we want to quest and how many we want to quest, we have to keep that in mind. This is still our planning phase, preparing for that quest. So typically speaking, we're going to quest this person, Glorfindel, because they have a willpower of 3. And to show that they're questing, we spin the card sideways, tap the card to show that that player is attending or participating in the quest, so now they're exhausted from participation in any other action like an attack or defense. And over here on this side, we're going to definitely pick Thalen to go on this quest. It says, while Thalen is committed to a quest, deal 1 damage to each enemy as it's revealed by the encounter deck. And so he's one that you'll typically want to involve in a quest, so we're going to exhaust him and show that he's in a quest. He only contributes 1, so right now we've got 3 from Glorfindel, and we've got 1 from Thalen, so we're at 4, and they're at 4. So we may want to commit 1 more person to the quest to make sure we have a pretty good chance of surviving this quest, or at least meeting the same level of threat and not suffer too much damage in this quest. So I'm going to go ahead and quest Barivor as well. Barivor has a couple of options. You can exhaust her to then have one of your players in the game draw 2 cards. But while that's powerful, we have a good selection of cards because we're just getting started, and making this first quest more balanced might be good, and she has a willpower of 2. So from the lore side, we've got a willpower of 5, and over here a willpower of 1, so we've got a total willpower of 6 coming from our heroes. All right, and so that is our planning phase. We've purchased what we want to purchase with those resources we gathered, and we have chosen which of our heroes are going to participate in the quest. Now we have to move to the quest phase. In the quest phase, you flip over one more card from the encounter deck for every player in the game. So we have a 2-player game going here. So we would flip over one for this player. And it says Eastern Crows, Surge. And this keyword Surge means that we're going to draw another card right away. And then it also has some other directions here, which I won't read, but it also tells us, well, I better read this force one. It says, force after Eastern Crows is defeated, shuffle it back into the encounter deck. So we've got a couple things that are going to be demonstrated here. We just brought a creature into an enemy. About the bottom, it tells us it's an enemy, into the staging area. And we had Thalen, who anytime an enemy comes into the staging area after he's been activated for a quest, he will deal damage to it. So we would put a wound on these Eastern Crows. However, the Eastern Crows only have 1 hit point, so they die immediately. Now, so we put the wound on, they die, we remove the wound, and then it says, after the crows are defeated, shuffle it back into the counter deck. I'm just going to plop it in there somewhere and not take the time to fully shuffle right now. And then it said Surge, so we got to immediately draw another card. So this is still basically that first draw. This one has a when revealed direction on it. So when revealed, each player raises his threat by 1 for each character he controls that is not currently committed to a quest. All right, so I've got 3 characters not committed to the quest. So I'm going to have to go up from 29 to 32 on my threat meter. And this character has 1 that's not on the quest, so they're going to have to go up 1 on the threat meter. And this is a treachery, so once it's resolved, you don't keep it in the staging area. It just goes to the discard pile for the encounter deck. So that was 1 reveal. The first one surged in a second card for that first reveal. Now we reveal a second card since it's a 2-player game. And this one is a location. All right, this location says Forest. While Enchanted Stream is the active location, players cannot draw cards. Okay, and it has 2 progress points. We would need to accomplish 2 progress points to fully investigate, survive, and pass through this location. All right, and so now we have turned over our cards, and now we have to look at the threat accumulated in the staging area and compare it to the willpower that we committed through our heroes in the quest. So we've got a 2, a 1, a 1, and a 2, so we've got a threat of 6. And if you recall down here, we had 2, 3, and 1, so we also have a willpower of 6. So it's balanced out. So in this case, we don't have to take any more threat. If we had committed too few or too small amount of willpower, we would have to add the difference in threat to our threat meters. But we broke even, so we don't have to add any threat. If we had provided more willpower than the threat of the enemies, then we would gain progress tokens. So if we had done 8 and they had 6, we would gain 2 progress tokens, and we could put them on the quest card, which remember, we need to get 8 progress before we complete this first quest card. So that is the questing phase. We compare our willpower that we've committed to the threat of the enemies in the staging area, and now we move on to the next phase, which is the travel phase. In the travel phase, we can choose a location that is in the staging area and say this is going to become the active location. And I'm kind of not having a lot of space here, but I'm going to try to squeeze it in over here. There's only 1 location here. And so these are all 3 enemy cards, and that's just explained here on the bottom. So in the encounter deck, you're either going to have enemies, locations, or treacherous events. And so that 1 card that we pulled over that made us add threat to our characters was a treacherous event, treachery. And this location, we're going to say, hey, we're going to explore this location. There's a couple reasons you might want to do this. If we don't, it stays in the staging area. And so this threat of 2 will be there next time we do a quest as well. And so if we put it out of the staging area, it gives us a chance to hopefully complete this and get it out of the game and definitely out of the staging area. But if you recall, the directions said that while this is active, we can't draw cards. And when we get back to the beginning of the next round in the resources stage, we get to draw a card. So we want to try to accomplish this before we get to the end of this round so we don't miss out on an opportunity to draw cards later. So that is our active location right now, and that is the 4th phase. The next phase is the encounter phase. And the encounter phase and combat phase, they sort of go together. They're technically separate steps, but in the encounter and combat, you're going to decide if you want to choose to engage the enemies that are up here, or if they are going to automatically engage you. And you always have the opportunity to choose to engage first, which could be helpful because you may want to draw someone out of that staging area that wouldn't naturally come of their own volition. or you may want to try to reorganize which of your hero sets engages which creatures. So you get to choose. Now in this first round, I'm just going to say we don't really need to choose too much who's going to attack. We'll just let them come down for a little bit of simplicity here. But in this encounter phase, if we choose not to engage someone, then we will look at their threat marks, their threat tallies up here at the top. Hill Trolls 30, Wolf Riders 10, and Misty Mountain Goblins are 15. And if our threat, this hero set is 32 and this player is 31, is greater than theirs, then they're automatically going to attack. And they're going to attack first player, second player, and back and forth until they all are engaged with our heroes. So this Hill Troll is going to attack our first player. You go by the highest first, and so this has a highest of 30, so it's going to attack our first player, engage with our first player. And then we go to the next, which is the Misty Mountain Goblins. The Misty Mountain Goblins are going to engage our second player. And then the Wolf Rider is going to engage back to our first player again. And so now all of these enemies are engaged, and we're going to have to do some combat. And so that is the encounter phase. We chose not to engage them. We just let it happen based on the fact that they all had smaller total threats than ours. They were going to automatically engage. We're too much of a threat to them, so they're going to engage us instead of ignore us. So that is the encounter phase. Now we come to the combat phase. So in the combat phase, you're going to put one of these encounter cards on top, and we call these shadow cards. And we just usually kind of put it over the corner. And these are going to be unknown circumstances that could arise during our combat phase. We don't know what they are. Now, some of the cards at the bottom, you can see on this one, you might be able to see this little skull and crossbones here with a line. That kind of card is what we call a shadow card because it has text below that says shadow, colon, and then a description. So if any of these cards have that skull with the line and the shadow text below, we're going to have to resolve it. If they don't have that shadow text below, then they just get discarded out of play, and we go ahead and combat the enemies as they are. And so we don't know exactly what we're going to see here, so we have to kind of think ahead here what might be there and how can we best defend against these different characters. So as we move the rest of the way through this combat phase, we put our shadow cards. Now we have to decide, will we defend? And so Denethor is really good at defend. He has a 3 defense, so he is going to defend against the Hill Troll. And over here, I'm going to use this Gondorian Spearman to defend against the Misty Mountain Goblins. And then this orc, this Wolf Rider Goblin Orc creature, I'm not going to be able to defend it because my characters over here can only defend the other players' characters if they have a Sentinel ability, and my 2 characters don't have that. Aragorn is one of the heroes that does. So I can't defend them. They have no other characters out here to defend against this Wolf Rider, so they're going to be undefended. And so we've applied the defense as we can, and now we can decide how we're going to resolve, or what's going to happen as we resolve these shadow cards. So we would start here with the Hill Troll, and this one does have a shadow text. Defending player chooses and returns 1 exhausted ally he controls to its owner. If he controls no exhausted allies, raise his threat by 3. Well, this player has no allies in play, and so he's going to have to raise his threat by 3. So now he's at a threat level of 34. Remember, if we reach 50, we die. We'll go to the Wolf Rider and reveal their shadow card. There is no shadow text below, so it just gets discarded. Fortunately, the Wolf Rider doesn't have any bad outcome for us. And then we come to the Misty Mountain Goblins. Oh, another shadow text. Okay, it says attacking enemy gets +1 threat, +2 if the defending player's threat is 35 or higher. So I'm at 32, so they don't get +2, fortunately, just +1. I'm going to leave it here so I don't forget to apply it. All right, so we've resolved the shadow effects, and now we figure out from their attack how well does our defense do. And so we start over here. This Hill Troll is attacking with 6, and Denethor can defend with 3. So the 6 minus 3 is a difference of 3, and so Denethor is going to take 3 wounds. And unfortunately, Denethor can only stand 3 wounds, and so Denethor has just been killed in battle. And so the coin that he had is lost, his hero is removed from the game, and unfortunately Denethor sacrificed himself in that battle. The Wolf Rider was undefended, has a hit point of 2, but there was no defense to take those wounds, and so you pick one of the other heroes and put those wounds on them, and I'm going to put them on Glorfindel, who has 5 hit points. The reason that I still went ahead and defended with Denethor on the Hill Troll is if I didn't defend at all, then there was going to be 6 hit points on any one character, and so someone was going to die. So we had to just choose who that was going to be. Over here on this side, we have the Gondorian Spearmen defending against the Misty Mountain Goblins. The Misty Mountain Goblins have an attack of 2. The Spearman has a defense of 1, and so there's a difference of 1, so the Spearman suffers 1 damage. The Spearman, though, only has 1 hit point, so the Spearman also falls in battle defending his fellow heroes, but it does, remember, say after the Gondorian Spearman is declared as a defender, deal 1 damage to the attacking enemy. So even though he dies, he got in 1 hit on these goblins. And so he dies and is discarded out of the game, but he did at least injure those goblins. So rough round on our defense there. And now we finish up the combat phase with our chance to counterattack the enemies. And so over here I have no one left to attack. Over here I have Gimli and I have Legolas. Now Legolas is a ranged character, meaning that he can attack someone that's engaged with another enemy. And he can attack for 3. And so we're going to use his attack against one of these 2. And we could choose either one. I'm going to, in this case, choose to use Legolas, and we're going to exhaust him to attack the Wolf Rider. So his 3 are going to be defended 0 by this Wolf Rider, and so he does 3 damage on the Wolf Rider. And the Wolf Rider can only take 2 hit points, so the Wolf Rider is destroyed in battle by Legolas, and Legolas is exhausted. But there's a response on Legolas card too. After Legolas participates in an attack that destroys an enemy, place 2 progress tokens on the current quest. Now, if you have a location that's active, you can't actually place those progress points on the quest card. You have to put them on the location first. In this case, it's actually good for us though, because the forest needs 2 progress tokens, and if it was still in play at the end when we get to the beginning of the next round, we wouldn't be able to draw cards. So those 2 progress points complete this location. We've inspected it, we've investigated, we've survived it, and moved on, and it leaves the game. And then the Wolf Rider again was killed by Legolas. Now we have Gimli, and Gimli cannot attack the Hill Troll because Gimli does not have that ranged ability. So Gimli is going to attack these Misty Mountain Goblins, and he can do 2 damage, and he can do against the 1 defense of the Misty Mountain Goblins. And so 2 minus 1 gives 1, so Gimli is going to do 1 more damage on the Misty Mountain Goblins. Now Gimli does have an interesting characteristic. If he has any injuries, any damage or wounds, he will gain 1 hit point for every wound that he has. At this point he's unwounded, so he's only got that attack strength of 2. So he places 1 more wound on the Misty Mountain Goblins. All right. Oh, I did forget to count this in when we were having the Gondorian Spearman. Actually should have added 1 more to this attack. The Spearman was going to die anyway, so it didn't really matter in that case, but that's an important. I left it there so I wouldn't forget, and still forgot. Another goof there, but hopefully that still makes sense. All right, so the Misty Mountain Goblins is wounded 2 times, but he can survive because he has a hit power of 3. The Hill Troll hasn't even been officially attacked yet, so that's a concerning issue we have going on here. And everyone is exhausted because they've either gone on the quest, defended, or fought. And so they're all exhausted. We have no more characters that we can choose to activate. And so that was the combat phase. Following the combat phase is the refresh phase. And so at this point we would refresh all of our characters. The enemies that have been engaged stay engaged and in play. Just move this back over. And then we raise our threat meter. So This player goes to 33, this player goes to 35, and then if you're keeping track of rounds, which we do, we change that one to show that now we're moving into the second round. And in the second round, we would begin again with the refresh phase, so we would get to draw another card each. So, oh, also in the refresh phase, sorry, we switch player number one goes to the other player. And then in the resource phase, I said that wrong, resource, not refresh, we draw another card for each player. And then we take resources for each hero. So we add one for each hero here. And unfortunately, Denethor passed on. And so he no longer is there. We only have two heroes on this side to gain their resources. And then we would move through the other phases again, using those coins to potentially purchase the help of an ally or purchase an attachment or choose to use the coins to create an event. And I didn't play this strategically. I didn't even read what all these cards are. I could have potentially maybe used some of these coins with events to do a better job with this round, but I was more concerned not with the quality of the play and how well I was doing as opposed to just teaching you the flow of the game. I didn't want to make the video too long where I was actually thinking through the steps. So probably pretty poorly played. I see here I could have maybe increased my damage here with this one. And then over here maybe I could have used some healing or something, I'm not sure, but I won't take the time to read them now either. But just so you know, there's a lot of things that we could have done with events since I did have some coins available to change the outcome of that round. But hopefully the flow of the round and the different steps makes sense to you. All right, so now that I have shown you basically the flow of the game and what the different steps are and what the components are, you can tell it's a reasonably complex game. The first time that my wife and I played, it took us quite a while and we felt a significant amount of frustration. I had watched a few videos, we'd read the rules, but just trying to remember all the different steps and trying to make sure that we were doing the right thing and having to look up things on Board Game Geek when we didn't understand exactly how to play a card. But the second time was much quicker and much more fluid, and we knew the flow of the different steps, and we were much more acquainted with the cards. We used the same cards in our second game, so we were very acquainted with them, knew what was to expect, both in the encounter deck, although they would come up in a different order because they've been shuffled. We knew what to expect. We also knew the different attachments and events and allies that we had in our decks that we could try to capitalize on, different combinations. And then the third time, we actually then went to a different quest with a different set of heroes, and we just keep changing it after that point. But I would say that if you're not familiar with this kind of a game, the first playthrough might be a little bit challenging, and it may take you a while to kind of work through. But hopefully this playthrough gives you a feel for whether it's the kind of game you would like. In terms of whether it's the kind of game we like, let me go through a quick overview/review of the different parts of the game, the different ways that I review games to tell you my overall conclusion. Where does it fall on my 0 to 12 scale, using that 12-sided die as kind of our base, and our 6 categories, scoring each one from 0 to 2. So the first category in the scoring rubric that I use is production. And the production quality of this game is pretty good. The art is beautiful. The limited edition art is incredible. The components are nice. The tokens are thick cardboard. Obviously, the player mat comes with that limited edition, so can't really consider that unless you're expecting to pursue that one. But that is a very nice addition if you want that collector's edition touch. The threat meters are nice and chunky and solid. So the components are good. I will say that when I bought the limited edition, the tokens are a little bit different size, or a little bit smaller than in the basic core set. So just a note on that if you're wanting to. My goal was to get 2 sets so I could play with 3 or 4 players, and so I thought I would combine those two, a basic core set with a limited edition kind of core set. I don't know if that's actually going to work, and I don't know when I'll have a chance to play with 3 or 4 players necessarily. But that's just a note there on the production. The rules are good. There's a lot of resources online to help you as well. But straight out of the box, I think the rules are good and clear. The limited edition had that nice little card that gave the steps summarized. But even if you don't have the limited edition, on the back of the rule book, it does show you kind of the step-by-step step summary. I like when they use the back of rule books with that. So I would say the production quality is 2 out of 2. Very well done, and not too much to complain about here for the production value. The second category is theme, and I feel that it is very immersive. There's flavor text on the cards, there's quotes from the books, You really feel like you're battling these different enemies and you're exploring these locations, or at least we do. And we usually play some Lord of the Rings soundtrack in the background to immerse us even further. But I feel like this, for a card game, really does send you through a storyline. You're trying to accomplish the quest. There's story text on those quest cards, and even though it's just little snippets of text, you feel, at least we do, like you're using these different allies to help you, and you're trying to battle. And we feel pretty immersed in it, even though it doesn't have like a Crossroads game where there's voice over anything like that. It still feels pretty immersive, and the gameplay, the way you survive and die, feels logical in this kind of a game with this kind of a theme. And just in terms of personal preference, Lord of the Rings is one of my favorite themes. I love the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movies, and love Lord of the Rings games for the most part. So theme is a 2 out of 2 for us for sure. The third category is mechanisms and decision making. And there is a lot of decision making. In terms of the mechanisms, you're basically having some luck, but you can mitigate some of that luck. You don't know what those shadow cards are. You don't know what it's going to turn over in the encounter deck in your staging area during the planning phase to prepare for a quest. But there are lots of cards and combinations you can use to mitigate that luck. So for some people just watching this, if you haven't seen a longer playthrough, a full playthrough, you may think, wow, there's a lot of luck in that game. It's just the draw of the cards. And while that's true to some extent, like I said, you can mitigate that. And I didn't really probably illustrate that aspect of the gameplay very well because I didn't read all the cards and really focus in on what those different events were. That maybe would have made that round a little bit better result. But there are ways you can mitigate that luck base. There's a lot of combinations, so the cards have multiple functions. They can be used to attack, to defend, they can be used to quest, they can be used sometimes with their different supplementary actions to, like Legolas, put progress on one of your quest tiles or your location cards. So there's a lot of combo mechanism that happens here, using both combos from allies with different characters and attachments with different characters, or even the strengths of one player versus another player. So in this case, the lore characters are really good at healing, and then the tactics characters are really good at fighting. And so if you cooperate with your partner in a two-player game, there's that mechanism, that cooperative nature of it that you're using. But there's a ton of decision making, and you do need to talk about it with your partner and think it through. You do need to figure out how you're going to invest your resources so that you can best mitigate and not be fully at the whim of the luck of a card draw or card flip, but that you can have some things set in motion to try to protect you from the worst case scenario when at all possible. And sometimes you just can't. So sometimes it will come down to a little bit of luck. But that's, I think, okay for me at least. That doesn't bother me. So decision making and mechanisms, as long as you're willing to kind of maybe slog through the first play, if you're not familiar with this kind of a living card game, then once you get comfortable with the flow and all the steps and how the steps integrate, I think you can find an immense amount of fun in the decision making and using managing your resources and coming up with those combos that help you move through this adventure. So I would say for mechanisms and decision making, I would give it a 2 out of 2. There is a little bit of a AP prone potentially. You could just sit in for hours trying to figure out all the different combos. So there's a little bit of that, but my wife and I, neither one are too AP prone. So, but just as a kind of a warning, analysis paralysis could be a real thing for some players in this one. So that is mechanisms and decision making. For game flow, that's how does that arc, does it feel like it's building? And there is definitely a build because your heroes get stronger, you get more attachments, you get greater allies, Gandalf pops in at just the right time and saves the day on a certain round. All these different things happen, and you do feel a progression to the game, you do feel an arc to the game, and you're trying to survive. And the one thing I would say for game flow, because you can do some of it simultaneously, it does move pretty quickly unless you get an analysis paralysis moment. It does flow pretty smoothly, but there was one game when we won and it got to the end and it was like we won and there wasn't that, I don't know, it just felt a little less than satisfying. We did win, but there wasn't something like another card that ends the story. It's just like you satisfy the requirements and so you won. And so there was that little bit of game flow at the end where when we reached the end we knew we accomplished it, and so there was a self-satisfaction. But it would have been nice maybe if there was another card that kind of told us because you've won, this happens, and move on to the next quest or something, just to kind of give it closure. It felt like there was that little bit of missing piece there for us. Now it's kind of picky. I don't know that that's a big issue. The other thing that I would say about game flow is because it has so many steps, especially when you're first getting comfortable, and because the encounter phase and the combat phase are sort of entwined but not exactly the same thing, that can be a little bit fiddly. And then the tokens can sometimes be a little bit fiddly, and spinning the cards or exhausting the characters. So there's a little bit of that. So game flow, I would say I would give it 1 out of 2 for game flow. It's not by any means terrible, but there's just a couple of little knocks that move it down to that mid-level for me in game flow. The next category is replay value. And if you just have the core set, there is a limit to that replay. You're going to have your 4 spheres with your tactics and your leadership and your spirit and your lore. And you can mix and match them basically endlessly. So in that sense, there's a lot of replayability. But there are only 3 quests. And so unless you're going to make up your own quests or find some fan-made quests online, the number of quests that they could go through is a bit limited if you just have the core set. Now, if you've looked into this living card game at all, you know there are bunches and bunches and bunches of deluxe expansions with many more quests, and then there's saga expansions, and then there's adventure packs. And so you could invest lots and lots of money and lots of time in finding more and more and more quests and more heroes. And so if you want to invest in it as a bigger game with lots of bits and pieces, then yeah, it has endless variability. If you're just wanting to get the core set and just play the core set, then it's going to be somewhat limited. Now for me, I tend to be a little bit more towards the completionist side. Even before I had played this, I was pretty sure I was going to love it, and I bought a couple of deluxe expansions and a saga expansion and a couple of adventure packs. So I haven't even used all of them yet, but I feel like you don't have to add the whole deal to have a pretty good amount of replayability. But you should be aware if you only have the core set, then you're going to have a limited number of quests in the box. So I think for us though, because I know I'm going to buy some more adventure packs, and because I love the theme so much and I enjoy the gameplay, I'm going to invest at least enough in it to have a huge amount of variability where I could have maybe 10 or 12 different quests to choose from, and then basically an infinite number of options for how I would combine the heroes and the different attachments and allies and such. So I think the replayability, while I could see for certain players would be low, from my perspective, because you have the option to expand it as much as you want almost, I say replayability is 2 out of 2. And then the last category is sort of my personal final thought in terms of, is this staying on the shelf? Or is this one that I'm going to be trading away? Is it one that will come off the shelf very often? And for me, it's a 2 out of 2. I'm not trading this one away. I enjoy it a lot. My wife enjoys it enough that she's willing to play with me pretty frequently, and so that's a good sign. In fact, after playing several games, she said, you know what, let's watch the Lord of the Rings movies again. I want to remember who all these characters are and the storyline behind it. And they are not her favorite movies by any stretch. And so that made an impression to me that she enjoyed the game enough. She wanted to go back to those stories. So this will for sure stay in our collection forever. And because I'm already investing in different expansion packs and stuff, I know it's going to come off the shelf a lot. And because I can play it as a solo player when she's not in the mood or when she's busy, I know it's going to get a ton of play. It's going to be on the table a lot for us. So for me, in terms of personal replayability or how much I'm willing to keep this game, it's a 2 out of 2 in this category. So if you go back over this list, that gives us a total of 11 out of 12 with that little bit of a ding on game flow, but still a great score for a great game in my opinion. Now, if you are the kind of player that knows you're going to want some expansions, you're going to want to invest more in it like I am. And I'm not saying this because I have any connection with Fantasy Flight. This is not a paid promotion. I won't benefit anything from this. But if you're the kind of player that I am and you know you're going to invest more in it, you can find the expansions for this practically everywhere. But I have to give a shout out to this small little company in the LA area called Legendesque. And I hope I'm saying that right, Elliot. But this company, it's a small company, but when I looked online, they had a lot of things available. And I put in the order one day. The very next day, the order was completed and shipped. Really quick turnaround. They had a great supply of things, and their personal service is really wonderful. I had a situation where I was getting ready to leave town. It was sort of a sudden thing, and I had an order that I just put in. emailed and said, hey, can I change the address and have it shipped to where I'm going? Or can you delay it because I don't want it to be sitting here while I'm gone? And I live in the LA area too, and Elliot actually volunteered to meet me and give a personal handoff of these games. And so, that's just tremendous customer service. And I will continue to return back to Legendesque and give them my business. So shout out to that company. If you're in the LA area and you want to support a local company, by all means, check them out on the internet. I'll put a link to their site in the description below. They deserve our business. So good shout out. Thank you very much, Elliot Lee, for your help. Well, I hope this video was helpful for you. I didn't do a full playthrough or even a very thorough playthrough like I do in some of my other videos. There's just so much to cover. I wanted to keep it at least a little bit shorter, but hopefully it gives you a feel for it. If you did like the video, click that like and subscribe button down below. If you want to see future videos that I put out, click on that bell icon to get notifications. And if you want to leave a comment, maybe there's something I made a mistake on or something that you want to ask me about that I didn't cover in this video, or maybe there's something you really love about this game that I didn't mention or you just want to highlight in the comments below, by all means chime in. I'd love to read what you have to say. So as always, thanks for watching. This is Billy, Indiana, signing off.